I guess we'll start here, folks. We've had 3 days of Senior Bowl practice. If you haven't seen it, ESPNU did a real nice job covering it. I think we learned a lot. We saw a lot once we found that it was actually there. They wouldn't actually advertise for it, but Paul did a good job finding that for us. So this is where I'll start here. I think once again, guys, we're going to have a very strong wide receiver class. It's a wide receiver class, as Paul and I talked about on Wednesday. Might have him a little disappointed because there's not a ton of skyscrapers. But it probably has Lance Medow very excited because you have a bunch of under 6-footers that are really playing well over at the Senior Bowl.
Smurfs.
Hey, Smurfs can earn the big paycheck too, and sometimes they play bigger than their size. You hear that phrase a lot, Paul.
This is true. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just telling you that some people would rather have ketchup on their hamburger. Other people would rather have mustard. I'm a ketchup guy.
I think there's quality and substance no matter the size of the wide receiver class. And we talked about this, I would say, for the last few years. All you have to do is go back to the draft, specifically the first round. That has been the position where if you're patient, you could be rewarded. Most GMs and teams, I think, at least have one example that they could point to over the last 3 years, I would argue.
Yeah,
and
Lance,
I think
by the way,
it's
Lance,
going to be the same.
Not just the first round. I mean, this is a bunch of really good players picked in the second round, too.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, Lance, let me make something clear, and I'm not trying to be a wise guy here. This is a symptom, in my opinion, of the makeup of the room. You know, if we were back in the day when Toomer and Plexico Burris were on the team, I would be looking for a Smurf. But because the makeup of the room has gotten smaller over the years, I'm not looking for a Smurf right now. I want somebody to complement the Smurfs they've already gotten, which is why I'm so gung-ho and have been for the last few years on getting a skyscraper.
In fairness,
please, let me make that clear. This is based on the makeup of the room.
I don't think it's fair to call Darius Slayton a Smurf. First of all,
he's not a Smurf,
that's
but
accurate.
he's an average height.
Yes.
He's an average height receiver. I tend, where's the production come from? A lot of times with the Giants, it's come from Tate. 2/3 of the productions come from the smaller guys. Shepard's smaller, and Tate is even not as big as Slayton either.
No, that's true. That's fair. Now, just to give people an idea, Dane Brugler put out his top 100, one of the best draft guys out there. And, while we're watching NFL all season, he's watching every college football game and tracking these guys. Most of his work is done already with the draft because he's watched tape on all these guys already. So he put out his top 100. Paul, Lance, I want you to give me a guess. How many wide receivers do you think Dane Brugler has in his top 100 players?
Jesus.
I would say he probably has...
There's going to be a bunch. I'm warning you, Lance. There's going to be a bunch.
17? Is that a reasonable number?
17?
What do you think, Paul?
Woo. Wow. I'll say more like 13.
Lance Medow. He has 16
really?
wide receivers in his top 100 players. And to give you an idea, in his top 50 players, he has 7 wide receivers and 11 wide receivers in his top 62. So you're looking at as many as a dozen wide receivers taken in the first 2 rounds, just according to his big board. Obviously, that might not happen when the draft takes place because a lot of teams have wide receivers. There's not a huge need for a lot of teams. But I think we saw that reflected in what we saw at the Senior Bowl, right? I mean, you look at all these guys at wide receiver that have played well. Kadarius Toney out of Florida has looked very good. Nico Collins out of Michigan has looked really good. You go to maybe some of the smaller schools. Cade Johnson looks like a pretty good slot guy. I think Austin Watkins had himself a nice little week. Both Clemson wide receivers, Amari Rodgers and Cornell Powell, I thought played very well. Another smaller school guy, Dwayne Eskridge out of Western Michigan. He's been fast and he played so well the first 2 days. He didn't even practice on Thursday. That's how good he felt about his first 2 days of practice. And that's from Western Michigan. That's not exactly a Big Ten program here. So that tells you how well he played. You have the kid out of North Carolina who's kind of that running back, wide receiver, flex type player, Demetric Felton out of UCLA. He played extremely well. And all these guys can be, top 4 round type of picks. And Shai Smith, I forgot about him out of South Carolina, another guy.
Frank Darby out of Arizona State's another one I throw out there.
He made some plays yesterday, no question about it. So you have these guys, just so many of them, that made plays. And it just shows you that the way college works now, guys, and I'm being told by people that pay attention to this stuff that next year's class is not nearly as good as these last two. Whatever, I'm not worried about that right now. But wide receivers is going to be a position where you're going to be able to find guys, and it doesn't have to be a first-round pick to find one. And it doesn't have to be a top 15 pick to find one. Look at some of the best guys the last 2 years. They were late first-round and second-round picks.
I'm with you, John. I mean, we said this going into last year's draft, that there was going to be probably as many as 4 rounds of make-it receivers, right? We talked about this at the Combine. And it turned out, look at the class.
Yep.
It was outstanding. There were non-first-round guys who made big impacts on their teams. And even then, we were being told by Tony Pauline and some of those other guys in Indianapolis, just wait, next year's receiving class is going to be even better. And people have held true to that same narrative, even though there were a ton of opt-outs this year. They still seem to believe that the receivers are going to be the stars of this draft. So I could not agree with you more. I will not be disappointed if the Giants do not get one of the, quote, 3 premier wide receivers in the draft who are expected to go in the top 10. If they can't get one of those at 11, I have no problem at all of waiting to the second or third round. Probably the second, but if they got
second's
to go
a better idea, because the third round you might be kind of stuck with one of the last couple guys that you don't love.
You might be. Yeah, you might be. Look, Nico Collins at 43. You know I'm all over it.
You know, Paul, it's funny you mentioned that, and Lance, I'll bring you in on this one. The more I watch Nico Collins, you know, he's a taller guy. He's 6'4". He's, I think, 216. I have to get the exact weight there, but he's 6'4". He's a big dude. You know, he's not one of these, like, super sudden guys at the line of scrimmage that's going to change directions really well. But we've seen him make so many catches down the field where he's tracking the ball, adjusting to it in midair, having to turn around to his back shoulder, switching what shoulder he's looking over, making contested catches. I have to go back and watch his 2019 tape. He did not play this year. But simply based on what I saw at the Senior Bowl, he would be a guy that would definitely be in the mix for me, picking 43rd overall.
Oh, thank you, John. I'm glad somebody agrees with me.
Well, why? Who was down on Nico Collins that you've chatted with?
Well, I figured you always being the contrarian, you have to hate him.
What is that supposed to mean? I'm not always the contrarian. If I don't agree with the sentiment, I'm going to let it know.
You want
I'm
some
not going to apologize for hiding my true
shrimp
feelings.
is what you want because it fits your narrative.
No, well, first of all, let me make something clear. Size is great, but size is not everything. And today's game is more about speed than size, I would argue.
I think that's true, too. I think that's a fair point.
So that's why I think a lot of these smaller guys in stature are getting attention and thriving, because in today's NFL, which we're also seeing on the college football level, if you have a guy that you could dump the ball off to in open space within a 10-yard radius, you are banking on him winning the battle up the field as opposed to having the big vertical threat that you could just hit the home run 50 yards down the field.
Space and
I think
speed,
we
right?
see a lot of that in the Senior Bowl class, but I think we've seen a lot of it over the last few drafts. And just look at the makeup of the rosters. Not everybody can have Tyreek Hill, but if you ask most general managers, they're going to sign up for Tyreek Hill maybe more so than just a tall guy that they could throw the ball up to in the red zone.
You know what, though, Lance? Really, and I'm not trying to be funny here. Again, 40 time is so overrated in so many aspects because it's play speed that matters. And you will have coaches who will tell you all the time, contrary to some of the draft gurus who continue to clock guys. Ooh, he better be a 4.42. He better be a 4.43. Yeah, well, you know what? Sometimes that guy who's a 4.58 plays faster, and he's able to get his separation.
Yeah,
and he's able to use his size and whatever he's got to make a play.
That's true, Paul, but you don't see many 4.58 wide receivers be stars in the league. I think I don't think you need to be a 4.42, but I do think there's a threshold where if you're over a certain time, that's a big red flag.
Well, Jerry Rice was a 4.6. I mean,
that's first of all, they didn't.
It's an aberration.
It's an aberration, and they didn't train for the combine then like they do now.
Yeah, the game has changed. It's evolved.
I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go back and look at my notes on Plexico. I'm pretty sure that Plexico was up in the 4.5s. But, again, the point is that every guy's going to have to be judged on an individual basis based on his game tape and what he shows there. That's why I always say the game tape to me still is the most important thing.
Of course it is.
You know, I know personnel people have said to me over the years, and I stick by this mantra all these years in the business, and that is you don't necessarily downgrade a guy for his combine numbers, and of course we still don't know exactly how all that stuff is going to shake out. What you do is you look at his game tape, and you may give him a little nudge based on some of his testing numbers. That could be possible, a small little nudge, but you're never going to downgrade a guy based on his testing numbers. What it will make you do is go back and look at him a second and third time.
Well, and I would say this, too, that this year, you know, the tape's even more important because these, you know, pro days are going to have, who knows how normalized these, you know, testing events are going to be from school to school. And I think, and again, I don't want to get, this is not combine. I don't want to get into the combine right now. But I think you use that to confirm what you see on tape. So if you have a question about a guy's speed on tape and then he tests poorly, well, then you know what? I might downgrade him a little bit. If you're like not sure about his game speed on tape and then he tests poorly, then that would be like, all right, maybe I'm right. Maybe he's not that fast. So
I did find it, John. Plexico Burress was 4.59.
But again, you're always going to find exceptions. It doesn't mean that you want to roll the dice on guys like that.
But my point is on the opposite side of the spectrum that don't automatically eliminate a guy.
No, but also the two guys you brought up happen to be two of the top wide receivers that we're talking about within NFL history as well, Paul. I mean, let's not overlook that.
Look, as much as I love Plexico Burress, unfortunately his outstanding seasons do not collect enough to compile a Hall of Fame resume.
Well, I'm not saying you have to be in the Hall of Fame to be a great wide receiver, but it's fair to say Jerry Rice and Plexico Burress were very productive guys for not just 1 year of a flash.
Again,
okay?
I know I'm kind of throwing out big names here, but you've heard of Herman Moore, right?
Of course, for the Lions, yeah.
Okay. Well, what do you think he was? He was probably one of the slowest big wide receivers that this league has ever seen, but he kicked people's butts.
I don't know why we got into testing speed here. This isn't what I was trying to do.
No, I don't know. I don't know either.
Well, you did. Don't look at me.
You were the one that brought
No. Lance was bringing up the speed for the Smurfs.
Yes, and then you brought up testing, which came out of left field.
I'm countering that I appreciate the speed for the Smurfs, but that doesn't automatically make them a better receiver for my team.
Right. That's
the point.
Fine. Limited Giant season tickets are on sale now for the 2021 season. In addition to ticket savings, membership benefits include access to exclusive events, experiences, pre-sales, and more. You can lock in your seat starting at just $100. Call 888-NYG-1925 or visit Giants.com/tickets for more information. All right, let's go to the offensive defensive line here, guys, before we get to the calls and talk about some other stuff going on in the NFL. You know, this offensive line class, to me, and a lot of the top guys were not necessarily in Mobile. Some were, like the Alex Leatherwoods of the world, guys like that. I don't think this is going to be as good of a top end of the class as you had last year, where we had, 4 guys in the top 12, I think, be offensive tackles, right? I think Tristan Wirfs went 12th to Tampa, if I remember correctly. You're not going to have that this year. You're maybe going to have 2, maybe 3 guys in the top 15. So it's not going to be as good at the top of the class, but I do think it's a bit of a deeper class. And I think if you are a team that wants to grab an offensive lineman, you have a better shot at finding one at the top end of that second round, or maybe even if one drops enough, the back end of the second round or top end of the third round. I do think it's a bit of a deeper class at that spot than we've seen in past years.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You could still get a quality guy, and nobody says you have to bring in a guy in the second or the third round and expect him to start immediately. It may be somebody who's going to be a swing guard, a swing tackle, and then year 2 or year 3, you're ready to insert them into the starting lineup. You look at the Giants, for example, and Nate Solder, to me, remains a big question mark. We're assuming that he'll be in the mix to return, but we'll see how the finances play out. Whenever a player opted out, I think there's a question mark over there, and whether or not you bring back a guy like Cam Fleming. And then with respect to the guards, Kevin Zeitler, who, once again, I will emphasize, is under contract, okay? So the Giants don't have to do anything with Kevin Zeitler, but a lot of people want to speculate that maybe they'll try to shed some salary to allow them to re-sign some of the defensive players. So my point is, You have guys that were young last year that played this year. I don't know necessarily if the Giants are saying if we grab a guy in the second or third round, we've got to start them immediately. But I think you may want to bring in a guy that's going to be additional competition to push some of the guys that may be in line for a starting position, so you don't simply just hand a guy a job because you lost somebody via free agency or you wound up cutting somebody.
Yeah, and Lance, I'll add to that. I think, and I said this to Feegs on yesterday's show, that if you could add somebody that's position versatile, that can play guard and tackle. Now, there's not a lot of those guys. Rashawn Slater's one now. He would have to be a first-round pick, obviously. But if you can find somebody that can compete at both spots, so if one of those young guys doesn't work out, and look, odds are, you look at the 4 young offensive linemen of the Giants, the odds that Thomas, Peart, Lemieux, and Hernandez all end up being long-term starters, just based on math and averages, the chances of that is just not great. That's not how it works in the NFL. So you would like to have a guy that could push or compete at 3 or 4 different spots. So for whichever one of those guys doesn't hit, you have then a younger guy that you can maybe slide in there and say, okay, you beat out this guy, and because you could play multiple spots, we have the flexibility to move you to a different position.
I'm with you. I think that, to me, is something that the Giants and every other team should be looking for. Because this way, if you do have an injury that comes up over the course of the season and you say, oh, well, this guy in college had to start a game or two at guard even though he was a tackle, then you know what? That, to me, is a blessing in disguise, that you wound up drafting somebody with versatility. Case in point, now, I'm not saying that this is going to be a guy that's going to be accessible. You brought up Alex Leatherwood, out of Alabama, who is an unbelievable presence if you just look at him. Before he even starts moving around on the field, my goodness, guy's like a brick wall. So he was a tackle, but at the Senior Bowl, they're trying to experiment with him at guard. So that would be an example, John, of somebody that you talked about. Another name that I want to throw out, and this is, once again, just based on pure presence, optics, and this is somebody that easily is going to be overlooked because he comes from a D3 program, Wisconsin Whitewater, Quinn Miners, who has the look of a trenches guy. I mean, this is a guy that was running over trees this offseason because he had no football. So he wasn't pancaking players on the field. He was pancaking trees in Canada where he was living, They literally took the guy, they put him in the forest, and he was rolling over tree branches. You're going to tell me that doesn't get Paul Dottino excited?
And by the way,
I tell you that
guy is like some weird combination of Nick Gates with the belly shirt and the hair, but also Brett Jones because he's from Canada. So if you merge Brett Jones and Nick Gates into one person, that's Quinn Miner.
Yeah,
I think that's a very good parallel.
I like that, John.
Yes.
I like that.
Paul, your thoughts on some of the offensive linemen we saw this week? I thought there were some small school guys in addition to Leatherwood, who I thought Leatherwood did actually struggle with some of the speed rushers around the outside at left tackle. But I think we did see some other guys. Trey Smith from Tennessee inside is just a mammoth individual. I think he's interesting.
He was 360,
yeah,
right?
I think 335 maybe.
He looks 360.
Yes, he does look 360. That's true.
He's busting out everywhere.
Dylan Radins from North Dakota State, I thought was an interesting guy who played guard and tackle. I think they played one game this year before their season got called because of the pandemic. So there were some other smaller school guys and even bigger school guys that I thought were interesting prospects on the offensive line.
Well, the only thing I would say about the O-line, John, from what I could tell, and I checked in, again, I spot-checked on yesterday's practice. It seemed to me that you've got some guys who have some size and will do well. What I saw was a lot of guys who handled the first moves pretty well.
Yeah.
What I don't know is when you're in live game action, and you're going to have guys who are coming on stunts and who are going to come with that secondary and third move. That I'm not sure about yet, but it looked like on first moves, the bulk of the offensive linemen at the Senior Bowl have an ability to at least make that initial block.
Yeah, to your point, I don't think we saw many elite athletes on the offensive line. Correct.
No.
I agree with that. That's fair.
So to me, my initial feeling, until I maybe we'll see more in the games. I'd love to see game conditions, which is why I'm anxious to see game tape on a lot of these guys. And that would be, what are they? Well, they're guys who may be legit backups. They're guys who may need polish, to get into the starting lineup. I don't necessarily see as many high-ranking offensive linemen, especially the tackles that we saw last year.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought Creed Humphrey, by the way, the center from Oklahoma, has looked really, really good. I think if the Giants were in need of a center, which they're not now because of the way Nick Gates played, I thought he could be a potential second-round pick. So
he's the lefty, right, John, if I'm correct?
Yes, which you don't often see, left-handed centers, absolutely. The other thing, too, guys, since we're doing O-line, we should do D-line, too. They're going up against each other. Again, I think this is similar where you're not going to have maybe even one edge rusher go in the top 15. Maybe one guy will sneak in there. But I think there are some developmental guys that you can try to pick in the end of the first round, second, third round, that you hope develop into somebody. But the problem you run into is that in order to be a great edge rusher, you almost have to be a great athlete. It's hard to be a really good edge rusher but not be a great athlete. It's just hard to do. And to Paul's point with the offensive line, I didn't see anybody that, last year we had Montez Sweat, right, at the Senior Bowl. And you're like, wow, okay. I see the package with him. Right. He looks special. I didn't see anybody pop that way to me this year.
No, well, not in the Senior Bowl class. Now, of course, like I said to you on previous shows, John, a guy like Rousseau out of Miami who opted out this year, and he's going to be in the draft. There are a lot of folks who think he is the best edge rusher in this draft.
Correct.
Okay? The problem is, after playing for 1 year and then opting out, do you think that the value is there really high? Is he going to give you immediate dividends when he's got such a little amount of experience at the big-time NCAA level? And see, that's the problem with me and the Giants here, John, because we know that they need some immediate dividends. If they're going to get an edge rusher, if they're going to take someone in the draft, the guy's got to be sure to give them some immediate production.
Which, by the way, for edge rushers generally doesn't happen.
It's hard.
Yeah.
That's why they usually go very high if they're going to be there. And I just don't see any confident, immediate production type edge rushers in this draft. And even if you want to project that Rousseau over the next 3 years or so is going to be really, really good, well, that doesn't help you right now. And so that to me makes that particular position a poor fit for the Giants, because now you're basically saying you're going to have to take a project who is he going to project to be better than what you project O'Shane Ximenez to be? Because Ximenez was one of those guys, okay? He was a guy who you don't take, first or second round. You wait a couple of rounds in, and you say, okay, we think he can project. He's a ball of clay. And we hope that in 3 seasons he becomes a legit pass rusher. Well, are the Giants in a position to do that right now? I don't think so.
Well, I think what we saw this past season is Patrick Graham's philosophy of, hey, if we get a double-digit sack guy, which was a pleasant surprise with Leonard Williams, then everybody else is going to be piecemeal. And we're going to mix and match, and we're going to do everything in our power to get to that 40 sack total.
That's
which is
not
what
good
they
enough,
accomplished.
though, in 2-minute drills and end-of-game situations.
And I'm not
That's
disagreeing
the
with
one
you.
hole.
But what I'm saying is they could very well bring in a free agent, not necessarily a star, but they could bring in more of a proven commodity who's been in the league for the last few years, who doesn't have to go through those growing pains that you're talking about, where you're impatient and you want to get him on the field next season and you want him to deliver. You could always go that route, and then you can take a flyer on a guy that may need a year or two of extra polish. I don't think there's anything wrong with maybe having that philosophy and combining the free agent, who may not be a household name, but just a quality guy, with somebody in the 3rd or 4th round of the draft. You could certainly do that.
Yeah, you can. But again, I think it's not necessarily going to help you now, but I don't think in the draft you're necessarily drafting for now anyway, especially in those later rounds.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, I think we've seen flashes out of this group. From just watching the individuals at the Senior Bowl with the practice, I think you'd see one rep and you're like, wow, this guy has something. And then you'd see another rep and it wasn't a wow you moment. For example, Carlos Basham out of Wake Forest is a guy that we didn't bring up. He's somebody that I think has potential interior outside play, a little bit maybe more versatility than some of the other guys. But his production dipped this past season compared to his previous years. So I think that's another example of, okay, did he peak too soon? Can he duplicate that? I think you like the intangibles, but I still think you're not sold on, is this a guy that every single season I throw him out there, is he going to give me the same level of productivity?
Yeah,
I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think Basham's an interesting second-round option. You know, the Giants play that multiple defense where you want guys to do different things, and he's a guy that can play end and tackle. I think, and Jeff and I talked about him yesterday a little bit, Lance, and I'm with you. I actually liked his pass rush better inside than outside. Watching
so did I, John.
During Senior Bowl week.
Taking on double teams especially.
And remember, he weighed in at 281, so it's not like he can't do it on passing down. So
you had alerted me to him, I guess it was the other day on the program, and I did specifically look for him more in the last couple of days of clips. And there's no question that that guy is going to make somebody in the second round very happy.